just want to take up the questions of the way that the agenda has been pushed to the right. I'm accepting, first of all, the argument that there's a lot of support for left-wing ideas for public ownership of the major services, the railways. And generally, opinion polls show that there's public support for the renationalisation of gas, water, electricity and so on, which is a positive. I think if we look at things across the board, the whole debate on immigration, which has just been raised by Bashir, has been pushed quite a long way to the right. I mean, the UKIP vote, which is a xenophobic driven party, although it's not quite so straightforward. In Campbell and Peck, the candidate was a black man, putting forward strangely very right-wing arguments about immigration, and council housing should only be for British people, which would have been used against his antecedents 20 or 30 years ago. It's more complicated than simply saying it's an out-and-out racist party. There's clearly racist in it and leading it. But the agenda has been pushed, and UKIP, putting itself forward, as all the other parties have followed suit. And I think it's to the ISN's credit that we have put our flag in the ground inside Tusk and argued against immigration controls and argued against the idea of just simply opposing racist immigration controls. We're opposed to immigration controls because immigration is not the problem that we're facing. The problem that we're facing is capitalism and the austerity that's driven by capitalism. The problem is that inside the workers' movement, it seems to me that in the absence of clear working class ideas being argued, some positive elements have ended up being used to fill out what are actually reactionary ideas. And I think we should say this. The vote for independence in Scotland, for me, is a mixture of an anti-austerity sentiment, an anti-cut sentiment, filling a receptacle in the form of the SNP, because there's no one else there. But in my opinion, the idea of Scottish nationalism is not a positive. And I actually think it's setting back the cause of Labour, if you like, with a little L, quite considerably, and it's going to make things more difficult for us, because we have now to win back from the SNP, the nationalists. We have to win the working class in Scotland back to a socialist argument rather than a nationalist argument. So we've got to engage with them and try to separate that out. And what Cameron and the Tories are doing on the question of England and devolution, I think we've got to expose as a complete fraud. Devolution for Manchester, devolution for the North. It's nothing of the sort. All it's doing is continuing what Thatcher began and limiting responsibility for making decisions, and simply making the decisions of local authorities or now mayors the question of, you make the cuts. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to give you all this power, but the power that you have is on this reduced budget. So you implement the cuts, so you take the opprobrium, and we get away with it. And we do it on the basis of some sort of ridiculous devolution. So what we have to do is to talk about genuine democracy, and genuine democracy across the whole of the UK and Europe, which means raising the idea, again, of common ownership, proper possession of the means of production, proper decisions, and all the rest of it is an attempt to pull the wool over the eyes of working class people, of somehow telling them that there's an answer to all of this problem by giving power to the North. And another thing, in this, the latest cabinet, they have something again that all parties have done, and we should challenge. They've now appointed to the House of Lords somebody who's never been elected to anything. I can't remember his name, but he's now going to be the minister for the North. Right? This businessman is going to be the minister to regenerate the North. He's never been elected. He's come from big business, and it shows you exactly what it's all about. The last thing that I want to say is on the question of Europe, because if we're talking about mapping out a strategy for changing society, I think that we need to raise that strategy has got to encompass not just England, not just the UK, but Europe as a continental movement. You cannot really begin to think about changing society in the UK on its own. Or, I think everybody would say in Greece on its own, or in Portugal on its own, or in Spain on its own. And so therefore we've got to raise once again the idea of an international socialist movement, of international socialist parties, collaborating and discussing and developing a strategy, not just here in Europe, but a strategy for a continental opposition to capitalism. Now that's a very serious thing that we've got to do. It's a long-term project. It's a very serious project, but if we don't start raising that in the working class here, it never gets off the ground. So these are things that we've got to think about and make sure that the rest of the labour movement takes seriously. Okay, well, comrades, first of all, I think it's been great discussion, really very, very, very good, and particularly the input of people that have come to the first meeting. I hope you've enjoyed it. And will come again, and I hope that you will join the ISN, because we think that we've got a very important contribution to make to the point that Greg just identified there in his contribution at the end. And what we need, as Greg put it, is one united socialist party. That's what we are about. That's really the calling card of the Independent Socialist Network. When we were set up, we brought together people from different backgrounds, different experiences, been through different organisations or none, but people who recognise that the fragmentation and the sectarianism and the division on the left is allowing the ruling class to get away with their vicious agenda. And we need to have a sense of proportion, and a sense of history, and a sense of perspective. And the sense of proportion that I mean is to understand that among socialists our differences, whilst important, are less important than fighting and prosecuting the class struggle. So just one point also, just to pick up on, and that's the point that Pam raised earlier, because I don't want to be misinterpreted, and if I didn't express myself in my opening comments well, I didn't at all mean that we don't have critical engagement or debate or discussion. In fact, I think that a working class organisation inevitably has discussion and debate and argument. And that's necessary and that's right and proper. But it has that discussion and debate within that organisation. It takes decisions and it moves on. It continues to have those debates. People can continue to disagree. But one party, I see no reason fundamentally why people in the SWP and people in the SP, people who are independent socialists or people on the left of the Labour Party have to be in different organisations. I don't think that it's sensible, and those organisations really have to address whether the differences between them are sufficient to justify them being in different organisations when what we're facing is an onslaught by this Tory government. And so in Left Unity and in Tusk, there are similar problems replicated. Actually, the same sort of ideas. Left Unity emerged, had vast potential. Ken Loach gave an appeal. 12,000 people responded. We did a new party. Actually, the leadership of Left Unity have basically squandered that potential. They squandered it. And they've done that because they haven't been able to overcome their own sectarianism towards the other parties which they complain about. So that's on top of certain incompetence and ineptitude and a lack of experience, and points that have been raised about how can you set up an alternative party to Labour and then not discuss standing in elections to build yourself. So that's on one hand. And then on the other side, we've got the SWP and the SP and other smaller groups who essentially all say similar things but in a different way. And it mirrors what's going on in Left Unity. They all think that they are the Socialist Party. They all think that they are it. And what they're trying to do is to create something bigger around them in which they can grow. That's not the strategy, or that's not what we in the ISN want. We don't want we want the party that we want to set up to be a socialist party. And within that, to have the debate and the discussion about, well, what do we say, what do we do, what steps should we take, and so on. And there's always going to be discussion, but the parameters, if you like, of that party should be A, B, C. Pam again raised this point, and Colin answered it, and I think I agree with what Colin was saying and what Rodney was saying. Language can be used to complicate and confuse. And so you have this discussion, well, are you arguing for a revolutionary party? Well, the first point is that the people that are asking those questions, they use a revolutionary party in a way that I don't recognise. What is a revolutionary party? As Colin said, what we want is a party that changes society. To change society, you have to have a fundamental transformation in property relations. You have to have a fundamental transformation in the ownership of the means of production. That entails a revolution. So, insofar as anybody is a socialist and wants to end capitalism and inaugurate socialism, that is a revolutionary program. Where the confusion becomes is actually some people who interpret being a revolutionary party that it must of necessity be an insurrectionary, almost minority event. Whereas I see it completely differently, going back to my opening remarks. For a successful transformation of society to take place, for a successful revolution to take place, it has to be the act of the working class, acting democratically, that is, as the majority class in society. So we are trying to set out now to build a party that will incorporate millions and millions and millions of working class people, not just in Britain, but across Europe and the rest of the world, working together. Now, that may seem pie in the sky. I don't think it is. Look at global religions. Why is it that you can have global religions, but you can't have a global political movement? We're facing a global economic system. It needs a global response. And so we have to answer these questions. So Ed put it very well early on in terms of what sort of party we're trying to build. If we say we're building a socialist party, if we're saying we're building a party that is not aiming to manage capitalism, but to transcend it, that it will not enter into collaboration or coalition with parties that are not socialist, who do not share those aims. These are certain, if you like, parameters within which you can have all sorts of discussions and debates. But you set the contours of the party. You go out and you embark in class struggle with the rest of the class who may not have drawn, for the majority part, will not have drawn yet the same conclusions that we have. Because we are here, because we're socialists and we're interested in developing a socialist party. But there will be workers who are confronting the system, confronting the bosses, confronting eviction, confronting debt. They're drawing conclusions. What we need is a party that struggles with them and charts a way forward, links their daily struggle with the struggle to change society. We ask them to join the party that set itself the task of changing the party. They will come in with all sorts of ideas that maybe we don't share, confused ideas, some backward ideas and so on. But they've joined a party that is a party of class struggle and transformative politics, and is trying to get rid of a system in which they are exploited, and they know instinctively it's about us and them, it's about the minority exploiting the majority. And they may not understand how it works or why they get away with it, but they want to change it. And so they come in. Now, is this a party in which revolutionaries and reformists coexist? Well, it's a party in which you've got more experienced and less experienced people fighting to build a party of fundamental change, a party of revolution. Now, that's not the same as building a party which the leadership of Left Unity, for example, set out to build, a broad party which incorporates people that don't share our political goal, and who want, for example, to tailor or water down their politics in order to accommodate people who might be inclined to support the Greens. No, we're now embarking on at least 5 years of struggle against the majority Tory government. We will work with everybody against the cuts, everybody who wants to fight against austerity, everybody who wants to fight against the savaging of welfare and so on. And that will include working alongside members of the Green Party, members of the Labour Party, members of no party, and so on. But we will not lower our socialist ideas in order to get that working relationship. We'll say, no, we'll work with you even though we disagree. And if we want to defeat the system that causes these problems, we have to go beyond simply fighting this cut or that cut. We've got to fight against the system that demands those cuts. And those people that have joined the Greens now, socialists that have joined the Greens at the moment, will, I believe, realise that that is a dead end. The Greens are not a party that stand for the transformation of the capitalist system. There are people within it who do, but the Green Party is not the vehicle to achieve it. And that's why the Greens' anti-austerity position is a utopian position, because they want to fight the cuts while keeping the system. It's the same as the Liberals. They want to, oh, well, we've got to help these poor people over here, but we've got to help the boss exploit these poor people over here. You can't do both at the same time. You're either with the working class against exploitation or with the boss in favour of exploitation. You can't look both ways. And that's the sort of party that we're trying to set up. So we are not at all in favour of recreating the old Labour Party. You know, so I say that because there are some out there who constantly repeat that that's what we're in favour of, even though they know that we're not. We're in favour of a socialist party that fights to transform society from top to bottom. We want to get rid of the top. We want to have no top. We want to have everybody taking from society according to their needs and contributing to society according to their ability. So there are problems on the way. Now we can't shy away from the problems, and if everybody in this room agrees generally with what I'm saying, even then we're still very small. So we have to try to push our ideas and our arguments out and influence other people, even though other parties that we're working with might be much bigger at this particular stage and not agree with what we're saying. But there are problems with the way that Tusk operates, even though there may be some steps in the right direction over the next period. We believe that Tusk should be a membership party. Those people that are joining Facebook should be allowed to join Tusk. We should not have the situation, as John has described in Plymouth, where an individual or our group or our union can say you can't do this because we're vetoing it. And we're going to face some very, very serious decisions, almost immediately actually. I'll give you this one example. 3 years ago in London, Tusk stood candidates in the Greater London Assembly. But we did not stand a mayoral candidate. And we didn't stand a mayoral candidate because one of the unions involved didn't want us to challenge Livingston. All right? So they didn't want us to stand for the mayoral. But by not standing in the mayoral election, We didn't get into the mayoral booklet, which every candidate gets into if you pay £10,000 and another £10,000 to stand, £20,000. But that goes into every household in London. Now, if we had stood, I'm not saying it would have made a fundamental difference, if we'd stood 3 years ago in London and got into 9 million homes, that would have made a bit of a difference this time around. You've got to build, you've got to build, and you've got to build. On the Green Party, just an aside, the Green Party, I've got the list here, it's off Wikipedia. From 1974 to 1997, they didn't retain a single deposit in a parliamentary election. They stood and they stood and they stood and they stood. And that's what we've got to do. A long-term project. Now, that question of the mayoral election for next year is going to pose some fundamental questions. Well, is it right that a constituent part of a federal structure can say, if everybody else wants to stand a mayoral candidate for the reasons I've said, but one constituent part says no, where does that leave us? It shows the inadequacies of that structure. So I agree with Dave Church at the beginning that what we need is a party, a single party, but I don't think that we can simply, ourselves at this stage, simply proclaim that we are it. We're not. We have to work with others, and we've done extremely well, both in Tusk and in Left Unity, in charting a way forward and saying, and this chimes with working class people, working class activists, unity. Unity on the socialist left. That's what we want, unity of the socialist left. So we need to participate in all the acts of resistance that are going to take place over the next months and the next years. People have pointed to some of them. But the question is, when we're doing that, if the only consequence of that is that we've built the People's Assembly, or we've built this movement, and we go to the elections in 5 years' time and we don't have a party that we can vote for, then where does that leave us with all that activity? We've been running around like headless chickens, resisting the cuts, and the same people get into power, the same people go unchallenged. So we've got to use the resistance activities to build the ideas of socialism and to build the idea of building a single, mass, united socialist party.
Thank you.